Why does God allow us to walk through depression?
Well, oftentimes depression is not random, but rather is very purposeful, and most people don't think of it that way. It comes upon them when they least expect it, and they suffer through it, and wonder why am I going through this? But one of the things that's interesting is that we need to recognize that we respond to things not as they are, but as we think they are. Sometimes we have experiences in life we don't fully understand. For example, have you ever met someone for the very first time, and while you're talking with them, you feel negative feelings toward them, and you don't understand why? If I were to ask you, well, did they reject you? No. Did they speak harshly to you? No. Did they use foul language or something like that? No. Did they have obvious character defects? No. So you're confused. You don't know why you're responding as you are. But from early childhood, we begin to associate emotions with particular types and characteristics of people and situations. For example, a woman who's been abused by her father comes to generally fear men, or a man whose family normally got drunk and mean during the Christmas holidays and now becomes depressed and sad during those holidays as an adult. Or a young woman, whom I once worked with, whose parents fought viciously at the dinner table. And as a result, she became anorexic. With a history of pain, people can't understand why life doesn't get any better. But the reality is that after years of painful associations, uh, they usually have built up emotional walls around themselves designed to protect themselves from any further hurt. The problem with that is that these walls keep out um, other more positive, more redemptive experiences that could transform their world. And so the result is they often experience depression. But I think there's a real purpose to depression, and it's essentially emotional alarm system, and it tells us that something is chronically wrong or missing, either within ourselves or in our relationships, or perhaps even in our circumstances. Sometimes all three. Depression is telling us we need to attend to something that has damaged us in the past, or and is likely still damaging us in the present. And that depression is an instrument of the divine image to protect the integrity of that image. And you say, how can you say something is positive about something as that has the appearance of something so negative as depression? But but that's true of all alarm systems, are they not? For example, alarms. We are surrounded by alarm systems. We have fire alarms. We have smoke alarms. There are all sorts of alarms in your car when you don't uh, click your seat belt. You know, ding, 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 ding. It's very annoying. Why do we have these alarms? Because they're all designed with one purpose in mind: to protect us. And the same thing is true about depression. It's designed to protect us from further hurt. And I have a saying analogy that I use here, that depression is to the psychological self as pain is to the physical self. No one likes pain because it's extremely unpleasant, but the sense of pain is probably the most important sensory system you have because it tells you something's wrong. If you walked out of your studio today and tripped on the steps and turned your ankle and you're in deep pain, immediately you would take your weight off that ankle and you'd be limping. If the pain didn't go away, you'd probably go to the doctor, have it x-rayed, do rehab, whatever is necessary. But you wouldn't do any of those things if you didn't have pain. And there are a few people in this world that are born without pain, and they do untold damage to themselves. This is actually the source of problems with leprosy. Leprosy is where you lose the feelings in your extremities, and so you can't feel anymore, and therefore you do untold damage. Like natives who have leprosy sometimes will pick up live coals in their hands because they can't feel them, but it destroys their hand.
Hmm.
Um, a famous Dr. Brand, who's a famous hand surgeon, talked about that issue. So pain is so very important in protecting us. It tells us to take action. Well, depression has the same function. It's also an alarm system, And so it's important to remember that it has a signaling function, and that it's designed to direct our attention to the importance of change in our lives. And so it's not, depression itself is not the problem, but rather it's a signal that there is a problem. And so in that sense, it's your ally, it's not your enemy. And it's a clarion call to change and to intervention. So far be it that we be ashamed of such an important alarm signal that has been provided for us by our God, our merciful God, who desires that we heal from the damage that we've done in our lives. And that's the problem, is everyone has had some damage in their lives because they didn't have perfect childhood. And things happen. Experiences in our lives occur, not just in childhood, but also in adulthood. Tragedies that occur, we talked about them in terms of some of the authors of composers of songs, compose their songs out of deep tragedy. So things happen that are negative. How we respond to them is incredibly important. And actually, there are patterns of depression which I think are important to keep in mind, because not all depressions are the same. For example, I've actually identified 5 depressive patterns. One is the withdrawn depressive. And this is a person who has feelings of helplessness and emptiness and low self-esteem, but they have an apathetic kind of given up quality to their lives. They just withdraw from others. They prefer isolation. They'll sit in a dark room by themselves for hours. They will avoid people at all costs. Michael Card, if you know who he is,
Yes.
his father was a physician, and he had severe depression, and he would come home from his rounds and he'd walk into the house, hardly acknowledge anyone, went straight to the den, locked the doors, and sat there in silence until bedtime. And Michael Card recalls his childhood is that the only way he knew his dad is to sit there at the door, talking in the crack at the bottom of the door, trying to talk to his dad, and when his dad would always tell him, "Go away, son." And that was the limit of his relationship with his father growing up. That's what withdrawn depressive looks like. Then there are dependent depressives. And dependent depressives are those who feel overwhelming anxiety. They have some of the same feelings of low self-esteem and helplessness and emptiness and so forth, but they also have this overwhelming anxiety. The person tends to be a clean, dependent type of person. Perhaps you met them before in their relationships with others. They actually do the opposite with withdrawn depressives. They seek people out, and they glom onto them and say, help me, and they are the kind that will emotionally drain you if you're around them very much. Mm-hmm. Then there are the somatic depressives, and these are people who are alive with body complaints of one sort or another, and are apt to express their feelings in persistent, often exaggerated physical symptoms. Mm-hmm. They tend to channel their depression into their bodies, essentially. Sometimes we call them hypochondriacs, and they're always worried about their health. But they're actually, in reality, depressed people searching for significance. And then there are angry depressives. And these, again, expressing feelings of persistent, sometimes intense anger toward people. And there's a deep gloom and doom that dominates the conversation. Have you ever known people like that? There's always negative and just constantly.
Oh, yeah. No many people like that. No many.
Yeah, right. And they're difficult to live with, as most people who live with them will testify to. They often have pretty high divorce rates because their spouses just can't live with that pessimism all the time. But they are depressed. And then finally, there are the anxiety depressives, and these are people who are constantly worrying, creating worst case scenarios about almost every circumstance. They're marked by feelings of nervousness and anxiety attacks, sometimes sweating, heart palpitations, shallow breathing, feelings of impending doom. All these are part of an anxiety attack. Or they may just simply have free-floating, generalized anxiety, but they're highly anxious people. And anxiety is a powerful component, I think, of many depressions. In fact, anxiety is often a precursor to depression, a relatively reliable cue to its impending onset. And anxiety basically reflects a basic insecurity in dealing and coping with life's challenges.
Mm-hmm.
It arises from a generalized fear of being emotionally or sometimes even physically hurt in some way. They're afraid of being hurt. People feel especially hurt when they feel that they don't matter. When what they have to say is invalidated or dismissed as unimportant, and they start feeling anxiety. Anxiety is the fear of getting hurt. Anger is the most common reaction to being hurt. So there's a difference there. And anger is often a cover for our vulnerability. We don't want to recognize openly our hurt, so we strike back in defense. And of course, we see in many passages. Peter was particularly who was also a man himself. Um, Peter was a man who would be the kind of be fairly prone to depression. And remember, after he betrayed our Lord, they said he went off and wept and separated himself from the rest of the disciples because he felt like he didn't deserve to be with them, and he went into severe depression. Um, and he's the one. If you read First Peter, he's the one who says, "Stay away from watch the example of our Lord. Don't don't get angry and explosive and so forth. Get it out on the table and express it." This is what happened with Job. Job became very angry when he lost everything in his life. And at one point, Job turns to God and he says, he says, you wink at the schemes of the wicked while you enjoy oppressing the righteous. I mean, that's a pretty severe accusation.
Mm-hmm.
And he was angry toward God. But what was God's response? God said, "Get it out on the table, Job." He didn't discourage him from saying it because that was an expression of his honest feelings at that point. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes we try to drive down our honesty, but God is not a fragile God. He can handle our anger and our upset and feeling and experiences that we have in this world. And he said that all he wants is our honesty. And that was what he had against Job's friends, is they weren't being very honest. And so that's how. But God is a fragile God, so he's not a fragile God. So he can handle our deepest, darkest feelings. And so to bring them to him in prayer is important. It's important to be honest to God with that. Yeah. And, but so many people tend to pull back and want to do that. But people, because they don't recognize some of these patterns of depression, they don't realize they're depressed, and they underestimate the frequency of depressiveness. By the way, depression is the fourth leading cause of disability in the world. It's right there. It's right up there, right behind heart disease, cancer, and automobile accidents. So it's much more frequent than most people give. Usually, at any given moment in time, between 19 and 20 million Americans suffer from depression of some sort. It's sometimes called the common cold of emotional disorders because it's so common. Mm-hmm. And it's more. You see a lot of depression in women. In fact, depression affects twice as many women as men. And that's regardless of racial or ethnic background or income levels. And 1 in 4 women will experience severe depression at some point in their lives. Depression
Gary, do you think that that's because they're more emotional?
Well, it's because of the experiences they have in life that, for example, because it is the #1 disability among women, and interesting enough, married women experience depression more often than single women do.
I believe that.
Because they have to deal with the problems in their marriage, and oftentimes they are the ones that have small children. They're given all the responsibility. The hubby doesn't help, and he figures going to work and is all he's required to do. He doesn't help out. One of the most powerful feelings women in those positions feel is intense loneliness. They're working with the children all day, but they don't have an adult to talk to. Even when he comes home, he buries himself in the newspaper or watches TV or whatever. So they don't have any real connection. So depression is quite common that way. Women who are victims of physical or sexual abuse are far greater risk of depression.
Mhm.
And while more men die from depression, statistics show that, twice as many women attempt suicide.
Mm.
The only difference in that statistic is that men tend to use more lethal means, like guns, whereas women tend to use like poisoning, taking overdose, pills, or some
Mhm.
other, or maybe um, slashing their wrist or something like that, which is can be fatal, but is not often. But the irony is that only about 1 in 5 people who experience depression, even severe depression, will ever seek treatment.
Yeah.
So most of the people who are depressed never seek treatment. And so they never see the purpose of depression and never see it as an alarm signal that could make the major difference in their lives.
Mhm.
And that's part of the tragedy. Now, in terms in terms of how women and men express it, it's interesting. Um, Women tend to blame themselves, I think. Men, on the other hand, tend to blame others. Interesting, isn't it? Women tend predominantly to feel sad and apathetic and worthless. So the withdrawn kind of dependent type of depressives, and then the somatic depressives, the ones that channel it through their body, the hypochondriacs, tend to be overwhelmingly women. Um, the women tend to be more feel anxious and scared in their depressiveness, where men feel more suspicious and guarded in their relationship. Women will tend to avoid conflicts at all costs. They've learned that in their socialization.
Mhm.
But men, on the other hand, tend to either wittingly or unwittingly create conflict. Women have trouble setting boundaries, adequate boundaries on themselves. But men tend to want to be in control at all times, and they
Mhm.
feel this need to be in control. And you can see how that fits together, and how that can become quite easily abusive. For a woman, it's far easier to talk about their self doubt and despair. They'll talk about their depression more readily than men. Men tend to find it as weak to admit to self doubt and despair and unhappiness and depression. They feel like it's a sign of weakness, and they want to be in control, so they have to deny it. Women tend to use food and friends and love to self medicate in a depression. But men tend to use alcohol or TV or sports or sex to self medicate. So they're very, very different sources of response that you see between men and women. That's one reason why sometimes they don't see the depression in each other.
Mhm.
Um, the wife might just see her husband as grumpy when in fact he's depressed. The husband may see the wife as simply cantankerous uh, or too easily volatile in her responses to things. In fact, she's depressed, um, and so they don't see the depression. And women also have one other thing that makes it difficult for them, and that is that the brain, the system that is involved in fight or flight response, the so-called what we call a pituitary hypothalamic adrenal loop in the brain, is activated more readily in women and stays activated longer than it does in men. And this is partly the result of the action of estrogen and progesterone on the neural system. So they have a greater tendency to become emotionally involved at a higher level, and it tends to stay activated for a longer period of time, the brain doing that. There's recent evidence also that the female brain does not process serotonin as quickly as the male brain. And serotonin is very important for avoiding depression. We have reduced levels of serotonin. And the other thing that women do are that make them more vulnerable is a postpartum depression in women. About 15% of all women experience postpartum depression. And as many as 80% of women experience postpartum blues. They're not full depression, they just feel bad and so on. So the majority of women, after they give birth, go through a period of feeling kind of blue. And And these are symptoms which don't reach the level of clinically diagnosable depression, but they're feeling down. There are some who experience not just premenstrual syndrome, the PMS, but also they may experience PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and which is a severe form of PMS, which is characterized with severely impaired behavior, deep and abiding depression, major depression episode, and oftentimes will be hospitalized because it can be that severe. So they have hormonal issues that they're dealing with. And about 12 million women suffer from depression every year. So you see how common it is. Anyway, those are some of the things about depression that I think are distinctions between men and women, and how it's expressed in ways that it's expressed in certain patterns, which a lot of people are not familiar with, and so consequently they don't know they're depressed, or they don't know that their partner is depressed. They may think their partner is just making difficulty for them, and they don't realize that. And if they did, then it would change. It would be a game changer. So part of when I used to do depression seminars is try to help people understand what depression is and what its function is. And it's a lot less pejorative when you think of depression as an alarm signal, as a natural alarm signal that points our attention to things that need to change in our lives in order for us to live symptom-free lives. And so it has a positive purpose. And most people think depression, there's only one thing, it's negative, because we feel so lousy, feel so down.
Mm-hmm. Gary, thank you so much for all that information. So much for us to know and hear. But you can get more information from Gary's book, Light in the Darkness, Finding Hope in the Shadow of Depression. It's a workbook that provides a Christian perspective on dealing with depression, and it aims to help readers understand that depression is not a sin or sickness, but rather a signal of emotional damage that needs healing. The workbook offers practical guidance and exercises to work through the book's principles and find hope and healing in Christ. Gary, they can get this book on your website.
It's www.heartswithpromise.com. Okay. And so we kind of redesigned it, and so it includes all the books, all the marriage books, as well as the depression books.
And thank you, Gary, so much for joining me today. And you're going to be back on again, I know. And if there's anybody out there that has any questions about depression, please put them in the comments. We'll have Gary back on again, and we'll answer your questions at that point.
Perhaps we can talk a little bit about things we can do to actually address depression. I mean, there are a lot of biblical issues that are described in the scriptures of God's own people who were depressed. Elijah went through a major depression, and how did God handle that? So it's a beautiful description of how we can make changes that will bring about a difference in our lives.